NFL Hall of Famer Warren Sapp has joined the Colorado staff. Now, there's something that we need to be specific about here, which is Sapp's role. And the way that I understand it is that Warren Sapp, because, and Danny, I think I've got this right, he is enrolled in a graduate class so that he can be a graduate assistant, so he can actually work with the players. If Sapp was an analyst, he would not be allowed to work with the players. Star power is always something that Deion's going to try to bring to his program. What do you make of Sapp joining the Buffs?
Oh, this is absolutely right up Coach Prime's alley, right? Lean into fame, lean into branding, lean into professional athletes, his connections. I think it's a great job for him too. I do think this is probably a lot more about recruiting as well, or talent acquisition, or NIL, however you want to get players to Boulder. That brings more credibility to their staff. There's one massive unknown. We don't know if Warren Sapp can coach. We don't know that, but I don't think
he's got to at least be able to give you something. I mean, we're talking about one of the most gifted and skilled defensive linemen in modern football history.
Yeah.
There is a value there that is larger than what you would get with, a run-of-the-mill replacement level coach. I would think so too, but we've seen historically great player. We've seen cases. Some former players are great at communicating fundamentals, technique, motivational tactics. They're great at it. Others we've seen struggle mightily. Like, they don't comprehend how come this player can't do what I can. And I think that's something that I think Deion Sanders struggles with that at times, when I think his expectation and being able to talk such a big game, he was always able to back it up. I'm sure it's frustrating that he talks a big game and his team didn't back it up last year. So I think that'll be these are unknowns. Maybe Sapp will be great. But I think as far as branding, I think he fits right in. And I do think he will bring an old school mentality to that team. And I think Deion deep down is old school. When you do talk about the way he coaches, he's hard on his players. I don't think he babies them. I don't think he coddles them. He's like, hey, you guys are making money. We better produce. And if you don't, I'm going to go find somebody else who will. I think Warren Sapp, culturally, I think he'll fit right in.
I mean, this is clearly the move that puts Colorado in the playoff. Right? Let's go back to what Deion said in January. This is on Undisputed. Last year, we were 7 points away from 7 to 8 more wins. We just didn't know how to win. We got our butts kicked twice. Several of those games we could have won. We could have definitely been a bowl team. We made noise, but now we're going to make some sounds. We can definitely make the playoff. I mean, he believes in this team. We all probably think that's crazy talk, but he really believes in this team. I mean, bringing more Hall of Famers in. And Danny, those silly points about Kenny Coach and what kind of effort we're going to get. Come on, man.
Man, you're about to bite your tongue off. That thing is so firmly planted in your cheek right now. I'm afraid you're going to lose it.
You know what? I've said what I wanted to say about Deion. I've got all my clips saved. I'm not going to bang on the guy every week. When what I said is going to happen does happen, I'm just going to pull him from last year. I don't need to reiterate my Deion take every time. I'll give the benefit of the doubt. They try to get in the transfer portal. He's doing some interesting things. A lot of very NFL influence on this staff. That could work. It could also bomb. I mean, we've seen very different outcomes from different programs trying the heavy NFL influence. I think it's kind of smart to stick Sapp in a GA role.
Right. I thought that part was like, oh, okay. That's at least some next level, trying to think about ways you could make the most out of this as possible. That did not seem like they were just trying to win the headline and get a spot here on the Cover 3 podcast. Coach Prime, I know you're watching, shout out to you.
Do you believe?
But I know that at least required some thought from somebody in that program of ways that they could maximize Sapp's use.
It's also only something that can be done by somebody who's independently wealthy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Normally, if you have an actual family to take care of, you can't move and take a GA role unless your wife makes bank. Actually, Saban tried this with Al Groh 15 years ago. Al Groh, who had been the head coach of the New York Jets, they were like, yeah, he's a graduate assistant at Alabama, and they're like, no. There is a rule against doing it for somebody who's been in coaching for a certain amount of time. So they kind of closed that loophole. But I don't think there's any rule against somebody who's played in the NFL but has not previously been a coach. So I'll give Deion a lot of credit. I think he really did a nice job with this.
Do we know what graduate class Warren's taking? That's what I want to know. I want to know.
You
what
are
class
in Warren Sapp's class. Please tell us. Is he actually on campus? there's no chance he's going to campus, right? Like he's got to just be on the laptop.
I need to know you're just sitting there in your course, and then Warren Sapp walks in and sits at the little chair next to you with like a notebook and a laptop. Like
we're gonna get a
to borrow
screenshot
a pen
of like the discussion board, you know?
What percentage?
Sapp, comma W, and his.
What percentage of college athletes in football and basketball do you think are actually attending class? Now, I did see the Duke. Did you see the Duke video that went viral? There was a girl after they had won advanced to the Elite Eight. She's like, let's see how many players show up. And 2 did show up. And one of them was Jared McCain. Like they did. So some of them do go. But like, I think the trend is, and especially since COVID, but it's maintained, they are mostly online. So they are not going to classes.
This is something that Ohio State fans used to bitch about incessantly about some of the SEC schools. Like, hey, they don't have to go to class. Our kids do. Some of the SEC schools will negatively recruit Ohio State and say, like, Ohio State makes you attend class. Like, it's a bad thing. Whereas, like, these guys don't have to leave their dorm.
How dare they?
I know. Can you imagine this school is making you go to class?
Now I think that's largely been fixed. But I would say at most schools, most of them are not 100% online. Like, in many cases, there's still, like, one class you have to go to.
I think it falls on a public-private line. I think the private schools that already
Notre Dame goes to class.
Like the private schools that already have a 25-person class for most of their regular classes probably have a higher standard for your attendance. And, you know, I was in a bunch of lecture hall classes. Attendance wasn't mandatory for me. It wasn't mandatory for the football players either. Just mandatory that we had to, you know, turn in the assignments. And so how those assignments got done, hey, who knows? But I would say
this sucked. All right. Let me just put it this way, because I was in a lot of those auditorium classes too. And it was very hit or miss depending on the professor. There was a Theater 3000. I think it was Theater 3000 was the course. And it was a cakewalk course that had probably 500 kids in this huge auditorium the first day of the class. And then guess how many showed up the second day? It was probably 50. Like it was like such a just weeding, like boom. But the professor was very much a stickler for athletes. And so he actually took attendance for the athletes. We had to sit in the front and he marked the box. He was like, check, you're here. And if you weren't, you'd get a call from your position coach that afternoon, because that was who was in charge of attending class. And if you didn't show up, you were running. So like even at some of the bigger schools back in the day, it's probably changed a lot. But even back in the day, it was like, no, you were an athlete. You had to attend class. Like they were sticklers about it.
Not to take us on a tangent, because I know we got a pretty loaded show.
But
who is the last player that you guys can recall who was academically ineligible?
That's a great
point.
I asked a guy
every player that didn't commit to my school didn't have the grades to get in, bud.
Dude, nowadays, I seriously think they just cook the books nonstop. Like every recruit ends up qualifying, right? Yeah. Every kid who's like kind of questionable in spring magically makes the grades, and they're there. And it used to be there were like seriously good players who would miss a fall season because they didn't have grades. Who's the last guy we've heard about with that?
Or eligibility, like to get into college. There were a lot of guys. How many guys had to go JUCO because they couldn't, you know, get the ACT or SAT score and they couldn't do it? I mean, I have stories, but
now, I'm not talking about like, hey, like you couldn't cut it at Notre Dame. I'm talking about like miss the NCAA academic, like
yes,
to where you're.
What was it? 700? I think 700 was the minimum SAT score.
Right. I guess John Emery at LSU was technically ineligible, but there was some other stuff there too.
Right? Well, to your point, I do think not stars, because they probably do cook the books for stars.
I think they cook the books like crazy. But all these online classes?
At the beginning of fall camp, when we're checking in on some of these early coach availabilities, we will hear like, oh, why is so-and-so not here? And it's like, oh, he's, you know, wrapping up second summer. He's got to get some things right on the academic side before we're ready for the fall. So I do feel like it does happen, but we only hear about it when they are on the way to getting it fixed and getting eligible once again.
And you've got some guys with bowl games
in years.
Yeah.
The one thing I wonder if this does still happen in bowl games, and the kid, instead of being announced academically ineligible, is like, oh, I'm opting out of the bowl game.
Oh yeah, and transferring.
Because like I do like back when I just covered FSU, there were some guys on that 2014 team who I got told for sure like failed out, and they're like, oh, we're going pro, we're opting out, and they're like, yeah, you're like, they just did not have the option to come back in terms of for the bowl game, like they didn't finish out the classes for the fall semester. But like for the full season stuff, it's very rare. I feel like it used to happen a lot.